Why X Matters is recorded live in the CJMU studios in downtown Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. Welcome to Why X Matters, where we are talking with a panel of industry-leading experts about why trust in institutions, sense of belonging, and civic engagement have all been on the decline. In this four-part podcast series, we are unpacking the Winnipeg Foundation's 2022 Vital Signs Report to try to spark conversations about how we can work together to restore trust, heal divides, and inspire change. I'm your host and moderator, Nolan Bicknell. So welcome to the fourth and final episode of our special series, Why X Matters. Today's episode is on empathy and compassion fatigue. We'll introduce the panelists and then we'll get right to it. So with us today is Daniel Lucier, proud Franco-Manitoban and CEO of the Rousseau Compassion Network.
Got it. Bien fait.
Which is responsible for several health and human service agencies here in Manitoba that were founded by the Grey Nuns and other religious sects in Manitoba. Daniel is also active in our community and sits on the board of the Winnipeg Foundation and the Forks North Portage Partnership. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thanks, Nolan. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to talk to you again. Our second panelist is Grace Shedler, born in Norway House and raised in God's Lake Cree community. Grace is a facilitator, trainer, and presenter at Circles for Reconciliation, which is a nonprofit which works to establish trusting and meaningful relationships between First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and non-Indigenous peoples as part of the 94 Calls to Action. Grace remains committed to sharing her language through teaching community language programs, the development of language resources, and working with many community programs in Winnipeg and Selkirk promoting Indigenous culture and language. Thank you for being here today, Grace.
Thanks, Nolan. Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, our final guest, Jamil Mahmood. He is the Executive Director at Main Street Project, formerly Executive Director at Spence Neighborhood Association. And for the last 8 years, Jamil has been the chair of the Gang Action Interagency Network, where he was instrumental in developing a gang strategy for the city of Winnipeg. And 5 years ago, Jamil began working as an outreach worker doing harm reduction outreach on the streets of Winnipeg. Jamil strongly believes in community-led development, social justice, harm reduction, and empowerment. Welcome, Jamil, to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again as well. So this is a big topic. This is episode 4. The first 3 episodes we've discussed topics that have been kind of interesting to explore the divisiveness of it in a way. The trustworthiness of our institutions, which was episode 1, sense of belonging, which was episode 2, and then the environment, where people's understanding of climate change can often differ. So today we want to engage the panel with talking about the key elements necessary to having constructive and safe conversations, as everyone's experience of the world varies. So let's dive into our first question. This is all about empathy, so let's start by defining empathy. What is empathy to you, and what are some examples of empathy and how it manifests in your field? Daniel, maybe we'll start with you there.
Yeah, sure. A simple way for me to think about empathy, which is extremely important for us humans to have, is our ability to feel with someone else. That allows us to understand, relate, and be in relationship with. But for me, the more interesting word that I'd like to pay attention to is compassion, because I think empathy is a precursor. Because I could feel with, but it doesn't tell me what to do, right? But compassion really is getting into that relationship, and then an intrinsic ability to want to actually do something that's of service in that moment and in that relationship with someone else. So that to me is what empathy is. It's an important piece. The word I gravitate to in my daily life is, where does compassion show up in that? Because that is the extra engagement, I think, in community that's important for me.
Absolutely. We will get into sort of solutions and ways we can foster more compassion and more empathy in a moment. But Grace, moving to you, how do you define empathy? And with your work with Circles for Reconciliation, how does empathy sort of appear in your work and in your day-to-day?
Okay, so for me, empathy is that I can feel what the other person is feeling. We can relate because we've gone through the same thing, perhaps. For example, loss of a loved one, like we can all relate to that, right, of course. One of the examples in our work, when I'm sitting in a circle, our circles are 5 First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and non-Indigenous people. And stories are shared through their themes, like, for example, residential schools, misconceptions of First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, overrepresentation of our justice system. So when a First Nations person shares their story, and since I'm Innu, I can always find a way to relate. When a non-Indigenous person speaks through, even though their experiences is not mine, I relate to their openness, right? Their interest in wanting to learn. I feel the people in our circles want to understand. When people don't want to understand the truth of our story and all they want to do is defend what they know, I have a hard time feeling empathy.
For sure. Yeah, totally. So over to Jamil. How do you define empathy, and what are some examples of it in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Grace and Dan said. Obviously, I think for me, it's really about that connection and relationship piece, being able to build that connection in the work. And I think in this work or social service work in general, if you don't approach it with empathy and relationship and connection, then you're really creating like a divide or like an othering of the people you're serving or working with. And I think that's where we see, a lot of the challenges in social services is if you're not able to do that from a relationship or connection base, then it does create a lot of challenges. So for us, at Main Street Project, it's really about making sure we're connecting with people where they're at. We're hiring people who have lived experience that can come in and take that role of supporting people who are in a situation they may have been in themselves in the past, and being able to then support them in whatever healing or recovery journey people are on, and walking that path with them.
That lived experience is so important, and it's just kind of it creates empathy without even really trying if you have a similar lived experience. So question 2, I know that all 3 of you are very busy, and just this whole sector in general, there is the burnout effect when you're doing this work for so many years, and like you said, you come up against people who are defensive and don't really want to grow or learn or empathize. But like, how do you keep from getting burnt out doing this work, and how do you remain empathetic if you're feeling some days where it's just on those tough days? How do you stay empathetic? Maybe we'll start with you, Grace.
Self-care is incredibly important for me. I walk a lot. I walk on the land, of course, and I listen to the land, and I spill my guts on the land. Nobody needs to hear that but me and the Creator. And I do this because it was given to me, right?
Yeah. Daniel, same question.
Yeah, I think I would, from my observations and the things I'm involved with and the caring profession and the people I've encountered, I think we have to acknowledge that it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's really hard work. So think about, and again, hats off to people in caring profession each day, waking up, being with people that, for whatever reason, are faced with challenges or barriers, or they're needing help, or they're very, put in vulnerable positions, right? So gotta acknowledge it's hard. When I, hear the question, I would first say, if you're feeling burnt out, let's honor that. Don't. It's hard to be empathetic all the time. Life happens, and so that connection, that's the promise we wanna hold every day, is to be in that space of connection and compassion and being altruistically involved in that sharing. But it's hard work. So, self-care, self-compassion, and if you're feeling burnt out as a care provider, that's okay. You need to reach out for help and put that oxygen mask, right? Because it's hard to relate.
Right, that old adage of make sure your mask is firmly secured before you help others.
And it's okay. I look at every day, that's, wake up every day and think of just normal relationships you have, and being in that spot of compassion, of connection all the time. It's hard work.
Yeah, exactly. Jamil, same question to you. I mean, if there were 30 hours in a day, you could probably do that and still have more to do. So how do you avoid burning out? You've been doing this work for a very long time, and how do you stay empathetic even when you're exhausted?
Yeah, I think the way things exist now, we don't have systems, especially for not-for-profits that help in a great way everywhere. Like, some agencies do great jobs, some roles do great jobs, but in terms of a system as a whole, we're not doing a great job. And I mean, we look at, I don't know if many systems are, you look at the healthcare system, there's a lot going on, and but I think there's some things. One is recognizing when you're at a point where that is, and then maybe making a move or a change, knowing that you can't give everything all the time, and how you manage that, I think is key. And it's okay to say, I've reached my limit. And we talk lots in our organization. We have many different programs. So, people who work in shelter, it's a very intense crisis environment. But, we also have, our housing programs where it's a little more chill. People are living there. It's more supportive role. And so maybe it's moving, to a different program, or finding a different organization that you can, recover or be at peace with. And I think that's okay. And I don't think it has to be like you have to do this work like pedal to the metal 100% all the time. It's okay to step back. It's okay to work less hours. It's okay to do that. And I think supporting people not feeling guilty with that, because I know that's, when I was younger, that was a big problem. You feel guilty when you can't help everybody, right? But you can't help everybody, and you can't help everyone unless you take care of yourself, like Grace was saying, right? And so I think finding a balance is always important, and then also building pathways for other people to do that too, and letting people know it's okay to take the pedal off the gas and do it in a slower way, a more thoughtful way, a way to give yourself that ability to recharge. And it's not just for you, it's for the people you're serving as well.
Exactly. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint, because if you're sprinting the whole time, you're going to run out of gas. And I think too, the pandemic really shined a light. We heard a lot, the first responders, those on the ground folks who really had to be the one-to-one connection with folks who are in vulnerable situations. And I'm hoping that it kind of changed the public's perception about what it means to be on the ground person who's helping in that way, because I don't think they get the flowers that they deserve in a lot of ways.
Nolan, can I just say on
Please.
that, so there was a level of awareness, I think, of the caring professions during COVID, and just want to again tip my hat out to the momentum and what they've been doing to support people. They're still doing it.
Of course.
They haven't necessarily even been able to take their foot off the pedal, and so I think we just need to acknowledge that. And if I can, just very quickly, we've uncovered in our work a little bit of the difference. Again, I talked about empathy being a precursor to compassion,
Right.
and if we can be in that compassion zone more often, it's actually what gives you energy, right? And so there's a lot of research out there that seems to suggest that, if you're really connected and if you're motivated from that intrinsic place to really be of service in that relationship, there's a benefit to someone who will be receiving compassion, but there's a benefit to the caregiver. And I suspect people who've chosen a caring profession can tap into that often. Not all the time. There is empathetic distress, I would call it, rather than compassion fatigue. And I think that's why we still have people every day that can do what they're doing. And again, hats off to the work they're doing.
Yeah, fully agreed. Grace?
I just want to add, in our organization right now, there's a lot of heartache. We had a lot of losses, like with our staff, our First Nations, Inuit, Métis staff. And what we do is we give them that time to heal. But also, like me and my partner, who's Bonnie Lowen's my partner, in circles we always have a partner. We always have one First Nations and one non-Indigenous person. And what we do in our organization is we do what we do best. That gives us back our energy in being empathetic, right? So we try and do we like to do our presentations, and we like to do circles. Like, for example, we did a couple of circles with the Humane Society when they took a course at Red River, and also we did one with Life Saving Society.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier a little bit about those who get defensive and maybe aren't as receptive to your comments and to your work, but what do you do in those situations when someone isn't really listening? How do you find common ground with them, and how do you sort of bridge that gap and connect with people who might not start on the same wavelength? It's probably a bit challenging, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
do you have any techniques or tricks or?
Well, yeah, we do. I'm stumbling.
No, it's okay.
I'll let somebody else answer. I'll come back to it.
Sure, yeah. Maybe we'll go to Jamil then. How do you, the work that you do, there's obviously a lot of different viewpoints that you hear, I'm sure. How do you sort of cut through all that noise and try to find common ground for people to understand the work that you're doing and why it's important?
Yeah, I think starting with the premise that I think everybody wants the best outcome, right? Like everybody's looking to do the best thing in the best way. People have different paths on how you get there, right? And I think it's okay to take different paths. There's no we know there's no silver bullet solution for the stuff we deal with on a daily basis, and so I think that's okay. And I think it's about, for me, it's always about education. Taking the time to have a conversation, I think, is so important. Oftentimes, you know, I mean, in the TikTok quick video world, that's not happening, right? It's talking at people, right? But I think talking to people, hearing people's opinion, you know, this is something we hear a lot, right? Like we know, you know, running a shelter on Main Street. We hear a lot. Like there's garbage in the neighborhood. There's lots of things, and you know, we'll get, you know, probably 3 to 5 calls a week just about people complaining about garbage, right? And garbage is a real problem. It's a problem citywide, but people see it when they're driving to work or whatever, and so they'll call us and complain. And you know, we just explain what's going on, why it's happening, what's going on with our city, and generally, I think I'd say 99% of the people that call really understand, and they just need to hear that. They need to know that someone's working on a plan, someone's developing a strategy, someone's, like, you know, collaborations are happening to make sure we can get better garbage collection in our city, and working with councillors and committees, and so just knowing that, I think, makes people feel a lot better, and it's so you can come at an issue with 2 opposing viewpoints, but if the end result is the same from both ends, then it's pretty easy through a good conversation and connection to get to that point as well. And so I think that's the best way, is to let people share, like hear people's stories and understand why they're at that point, and then what can you do? Maybe you need to move your point as well, and it's that give and take, and that's where conversations are, when you can do that in a really good way, versus just like talking at people or putting comments on social media or whatever. No, never read the comments.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, good faith discussions, I think, too, of being willing to look inward and assess your own biases and beliefs and thoughts and processes, because you never know what you don't know. Maybe Dan, I'll go to you with the same question.
Great conversation, right? Like, me, the word that comes up is, how do I, and I'll just speak for me, and you know, as unskillful as I can be in those kind of things, because we're all passionate about our ideas and our thoughts and our positions, and but how do I always stay curious, right? How do I stay curious with whoever I'm speaking with? And you know, I think I recognize now that I can always learn, whether I agree or not agree. There's always something to learn in dialogue and in relationship with others. So how do I stay curious? And you know, when I was hearing Jamil, something that I hope I'm getting better at, but I know I have to work at, is just listening, right? And not getting caught up in my position and my story, and really listening to understand what Jamil might be thinking about something, or Grace may have an opinion, right? The end, you know, we may not agree, but can I, in a human way, really connect to that, to understand, you know, where they may be coming from? And it's hard work, folks, but you know, it's a skill we got to continue to kind of hone in. So yeah, me, it's just stay curious, right? Stay curious, open, and suspend the stories and judgment, you know, until you, as long as you can, because chances are, if you want to argue with me, I'll probably have to take your side, right?
Well, it takes a lot less energy to just wait for your turn to talk than it does to listen and actually focus on the thing that's being said too. Grace, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly what they both have said. I guess with circles, we are very good listeners, very good listeners, and we're not opinionated to when someone is sharing their experience. We're just there to listen, right? We don't give them any bad ideas.
Well, and you're creating the environment for those conversations, right?
That's
and I
right.
think that's super important as well, to be able to set a stage to have a safe conversation. And so often we don't have that, and that's where people get, you know, frustrated or angry with each other. But you know, you're out there actually building a space for these conversations to happen in a really positive way, and that's super important. It's like it's like the setup of an event, right? Like the event is only good if all the pre-work happens to make sure everything's set up and organized, right? And I think that's what you folks are doing in a really great way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the environment and the process, right? The process itself, sitting in circle, and not being able to have the privilege of being in circle or even in ceremony, just the process to be able to share and have conversations important, right?
There's something pretty powerful about it too, and I think we've touched on it a little bit, but being able to look at someone in the eyes is something that I didn't really think too much about until the Zoom era started, and we had all these meetings and interviews, and I was doing all these things, and you're looking just kind of to the south or to below someone's eyes, and it's not really the same thing. But aside from setting a safe area and being curious, what are some other tips that you could give our listeners when they come up across maybe a difficult conversation on how they can listen and maybe be more of a sponge rather than a person who's putting out ideas but taking in as well? Do you have any tips or ideas or suggestions? Maybe we'll start with Dan.
Yeah, well, I just go back to what, so how do you stay curious, right? Try to stay present. Try to stop the chatter in your head and truly listen, right? Try to suspend the stories in your head. Mm-hmm. And the minute something comes up, don't follow it. Get back into the conversation. Right. These are all, more technical things that I think are important. But me, it's more about, when you get to a point where we may not agree, right? So how do you unwind from that? And I think there's things like if you're truly listening, you can at least acknowledge, Grace, thank you. This is what I hear is important for you. Here's what I understand your position to be. Thank you for that. I learned something. Yeah, I still disagree, but let's shake on it, right? And we can do it in a human way, right? And if we do that, I think, we could probably get out a lot of the messes we find ourselves in with prejudgments that we'll never be able to relate to the other who has a different opinion, right? Which I think is false.
Yeah, the othering of things is such a dangerous way of existing. Jamil, do you have any thoughts on sort of tips on how to be a good listener?
Yeah, I think for me this is one of those things of why I believe in harm reduction so much. It is, some people see it as a divisive topic. I don't, but I think people who understand harm reduction and the basis of wanting to reduce harm in any interaction, in any environment, in any situation, whether it's addiction, mental health, just life, right? And it's about making sure you're being able to see what other people are going to be faced in terms of harms and how to mitigate those harms, right? And that's kind of, I think, how you approach difficult conversations or challenging conversations, right? Like, you don't want to inflict harm on people with your opinion or your point of view, right? But you want to be able to open a dialogue where you can mitigate the harms to yourself, but also to that person, but then also be able to have a frank or honest conversation and get to a point where you can agree to disagree, but maybe you've also been able to open a new thought or a new idea that can then grow into something great and beautiful. And I think that's what you always want to get to in any conversation, right? And these issues are hard. You're talking about people's lives. Right. You're talking about your family. You're talking about people you care about, right? And it's not as easy to come rationally into every conversation. And so figuring out how you can get to that point yourself, where you can have a rational conversation, remove some of maybe the more harsh emotions, and then come at an honest point, right? And I think being honest is a key to making that work well. Is can you be honest with how you feel about the situation? Like, I can't talk to you right now, Dan, because this is too passionate for me, right? Like, this is really important, but like, maybe we can come back to that conversation, or maybe we can find a way to get there another way that I can kind of take a minute and reflect, or whatever that is.
Yeah, good faith discussions don't usually make the front page, or they don't really get to the top of the algorithm on social media. Grace, do you have any thoughts as far as like good listening tips? I'm sure you've spoken with a lot of people in your work, and like, what happens when you're hearing something that is either false or something that's not pleasant to hear, but how do you stay calm and listen in those situations?
I don't correct people with the way that they think, but I really like to share what I know, and I only share what I know because I follow the 7 natural laws. I only speak the truth. Right, and when we set the tone in circles, that's one of the things that we start with are the 7 natural laws, and then we start off with a smudge or else a drum, or else we say we have a minute of silence for people to reflect on those 7 natural laws. So I think it really sets the tone in our circles for that. But as for people disagreeing with maybe a normal conversation that I would have, I stand my ground. right?
Yeah.
You know, your views is great. I will listen to your views, but I'll also share with you that this is what I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you break down the 7 laws for those of us that may not know?
Oh, right.
exactly?
Okay. Well, it's the truth, humility, bravery, wisdom, honesty. My mind just went out the window. There's 2 more, I know.
I think well, it's ancient wisdom is what.
That's
it is,
right.
right?
You know what?
Like,
And
it's things that have been working and have worked.
That's right.
for a
And
long
and
time.
everybody uses them. Everybody, like all of us sitting around in this room, have all that, right? These are natural laws, and we practice them every day.
Yeah.
Right.
So how do we have constructive? Like, there's so much yelling. We're in the middle of a provincial election. There's so much left and right chatter and middle chatter, and the loudest voice gets the front page. But how do we remain constructive and empathetic while there's so many conversations about topics that tend to drive a wedge between us? And I think that we can talk about how it's intentionally driving a wedge between people and trying to, divide us. But how do we stay on topic? How do we stay productive? How do we stay empathetic in these having difficult discussions? Jamil, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's important to not let position or status kind of get in the way of good work. And I think this is one of the challenges with politicians is their job is not as clear, black and white, what they do every day and the work they do in terms of versus what we do in community. And I think, I think sometimes the best thing for people to do if they're not sure or they have a strong opinion, but it may be causing harm, is to figure out if you can just get out of the way of that, right? Like in your role. And I think, I don't want to go on a soapbox here, but what we saw in the pandemic was, governments got out of the way because they had to, and community came together and came up with solutions to keep people safe, to get people through this really trying, years. It was so started short term, but like years of work, and it really just showed that if you allow community relationships to do the important things we need and don't bog them down with ridiculous funding requirements, restrictions, all these things, and just get what people need to them directly. We just saw really beautiful things happening, right, in a really hard time, and I want to figure out how to take those lessons and just remind everybody all the time that like we figured it out.
Right. There's
a period of time where everything was really hard and no one knew what was going on, and we figured out how to do it by letting community do what community does best. And I think if we can go back to that and not let roles or status or government kind of get in the way of community doing the good work, then I think it gives us a much better way to create a society that's a better place for everybody.
Yeah, it speaks to a bottom-up, human-first approach rather than a top-down. That's been the hundreds of years of we'll tell you what you need, we'll tell you why you need it, we'll tell you how to improve your situation, instead of asking what do you need, how can we improve your situation. Grace, any thoughts about these divisive times and topics that we're thinking about?
I have lots of thoughts.
Let's hear 'em.
I'm all over the place. That's the saddest thing here. I can't even stay focused. I think one of the things, like, for me, as I stand your ground, but one of the things I wanted to share back with the question before, when I talked about the 7 natural laws, is patience, right? You have to have a lot of patience. And I say that because I'm just going to quick overview of a eagle feather, bringing the eagle feather into the courtroom. That was, that happened in 2018. And we started that, I started that, the thought process on that back in the 2000s. And I had to go to both sides. I had to go to the First Nations and Métis people. And then I had to go to the non-Indigenous people. And there was a lot of prep work in trying to bring the eagle feather into the courtroom. Luckily I had help in courts, because I had a provincial judge, a federal judge, and the executive director for courts formed a committee to bring the eagle feather into the courtroom. So there was a lot of convincing with the First Nations people, and there was a lot of convincing with the judicial people. but we were persistent and patient, and we listened to them, they listened to us, we listened to them, they listened to us, and we finally, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but at least the eagle feathers are now in the courts. So that was, and I've seen it, it's good. It has worked for a lot of people, so that was worth that. I mean, it took a lot of years, right?
I think that's another thing too, is that it takes time to do this work properly, and I think a lot of times the priority is speed, efficiency, get it done cheap as fast as we can, whereas doing the work properly takes time, energy, and a back and forth, and not just a one direction telling the other direction how it's going to be. A little bit. Dan, what are your thoughts on?
Oh
on
man,
this?
like this is a rich conversation. We go to a lot of places. So, around the divisiveness stuff, there's I've been curious about this particular saying. I think it came from a football coach, and I'm not a big football, but he said something like this. Don't quote me on the exact words, but you'll get the intention, right? The quality of any intervention depends on the inner quality of the intervener, right? And so when we talk about divisiveness, for me, it's a recognition that we all have our work to do, right? All our work to do, to work hard. Again, I may be repeating myself, but to stay curious, to stay open, to stay engaged, to be uncomfortable, to reach out to the other, to have a conversation and don't shut it down. There's always some element of common ground in any relationship. There has to be. That's how the world works. We are completely intertwined and connected, and that is just the way it works. So we gotta always remember that. And at some basic human level, and this may even be from a Buddhist perspective, it doesn't matter. It resonates for me. Is everyone wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be free from suffering, right? Some form. And they all want to belong. We all want to be loved. So at some basic level, we're all in that space together. So everything else, I think, it's okay. We're not all going to agree, and there's going to be changes and differences. But that's the work we do. And I'll end on, again, this notion of between stimulus and response, there's space. And that's what we need. That's our work, is how do I create more space to stay engaged and not react too quickly? Because in that moment, then defines what I'm about and what's about to happen and what can change the world, right? So that's the work we need to do. Now, the other conversations are around, like, I wish we would have conversations around what leadership is and start thinking about leadership differently. Because I think we've bought into this notion that leader's some powerful, all-knowing person at the top that's got all the answers. I think that's changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And I think leadership should be about convenership, and it should be about convening community, because community will always form and know what needs to do. The answers are there. We just need to rethink how we've designed systems, which are all created by people, by the way. Can all change for the betterment. We're in this time of deep change required in all our systems. There's cracks everywhere. And so we need to rethink this differently, and I think it's time to change some deep-bedded structures and ways of thinking we've given ourselves that just don't work anymore.
Yeah, Jamil, I'm curious your perspective on system reform and all of the... we only have, 10 more minutes or so we could talk for hours about system reform, but I mean, you are intertwined with so many different systems and levels of government and everything. So, like, what are your thoughts on how we can slay this beast that is systems of oppression that need to be dismantled, that are so ingrained in our ways of thinking and knowing and doing, but it's not sustainable, clearly? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, burn it down? No. No, I mean, the problem is that the systems of oppression won't change themselves. There's no reason for them to do it. They get what they want, right? They want power, control, all that stuff, so we can't expect them to change it, right? So the only way you change a system or dismantle oppression is from organizing or getting people together and bringing people together. And I think we have, I think if we can do three things in this next 10, 15 years, we can literally change our country and community, right? Like, I think we need to strengthen healthcare. Without that, without people having access, and I'm not just talking about Western medicine, but also engaging, all forms of healing into our practice and free. Like, it should all be free and accessible, right? And, housing, we need to create housing for everybody. If we don't, we're never going to be able to do any change, right? Like, we can't change the system. We can't end homelessness unless you have places to house people, and there have to be good housing, there have to be supportive housing. We have to stop relying on the private market to provide all this stuff. It has to come from community. It has to be community-owned assets, right? It has to be places that you can't sell and get rid of, and lose that stock. And we've seen since the 70s this erosion of housing across the country, right? And so I think that, and then the third is and it relates to healthcare, but a better approach to addictions and mental health, and specifically like looking at toxic drug supply and taking really open-minded approaches to how to address those issues and give people the capacity to make the change in their life they need. I think I've never met anyone that when given the time and space didn't want to make the right changes for their life to make it better. But we also have to address trauma, history of colonization, right? Like our country is built on that. And so until we try to build our country on something else, it won't change. And so I think that's where we really need to see a change. And if we can do that, if we can do those three things, we'll be much further along the way to a much better society. And once we have a strong safety net where everyone's supported, then that's where we'll thrive, right? And that's where people will be as healthy as possible, and they'll support each other around them. But if we keep allowing these issues, and you'll see it in this election coming up, like we're going to see homelessness and addiction, tossed around, and the solutions are all going to be police-based or carceral-based or criminalizing people for trying to survive. And if that's the route we want to go, we can. I mean, we've seen it in the country below us, right? Like, it doesn't lead to a more productive society. It doesn't lead to a more just society. It doesn't lead to a more caring society. And so we need to change that. I mean, to change how we want our country built, and that won't change if we keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Incredibly said. Yeah. Grace, any thoughts of what Jamil's just talked about?
What I like about our organization is that we don't have the hierarchy of what leadership looks like all around it. Like, our organization is based on partnership, and we're all partners, and no one is better or higher than the other, because we all discuss our finance, like everything that we do in circles is with everybody that's in that circle. And I think that works because it's Indigenous led, number one, for Circles for Reconciliation. And as First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, that's how we functioned back prior to what leadership looks like now. Yeah.
I think that is the hopeful thing, is that solutions do exist. There are places that are doing things that we're talking about and have implemented some of these ideas, and it does work, and we can do it, but it's just, we gotta kind of all get on the same page a little bit. So for this last question, when it comes to restoring trust in institutions, healing divides, and inspiring change, either from your own work with your own organizations or things that you're seeing in the community, what gives you hope right now when looking at the landscape of Winnipeg when it comes to empathy and compassion? What gives you hope, Dan?
These conversations. And there are more of them. And I'm noticing more of them. And I think what I'm hearing in the conversations is people, I hate using the term, it's been hijacked, and kind of waking up to there's a different world waiting for us, because what we thought it wasn't. And we can do better. And there's more of those conversations happening, and they're happening all the time. And I think, for some who have been at it for a very, very, very long time, it'll never be fast enough. But I'm hopeful it's coming. And at the end of the day, when you break it all down, institutions, policies, governments, it's all people. It's all people. We got to stop hiding behind the word institution and systems and organizations. It's people. And I like it when we can see each other and talk to each other and stay curious. And I think there's lots of potential. But so you have to stay hopeful. If you don't have hope, well, I don't know. What's the alternative?
No kidding. Grace, what gives you hope in your work or in the community? What are you seeing that's hopeful?
In my community of First Nations people, when I see people owning their language, their culture, their traditions, their ceremonies, I see strength in, and also with non-Indigenous people having our backs. I think that's key, right? We have a whole line of allies, I guess you would say. And then also that some of the calls to action have been completed. Actually, it's slow, but at least there has been some that have been done. So that gives me hope.
The roadmap is there. The actions are written down. Yeah,
That's
exactly. Jamil, what are your thoughts when it comes to hope? What gives you hope?
Yeah, hope is essential, and I know we talked about burning out earlier, and I think that hope is a good way to not burn yourself out, but I think you have to celebrate every small win, and I think we don't do it enough, and I know I've been guilty of this most of my life, but the work is like you do something good, you achieve it, you get it up and running, whatever it is, and then you go to the next thing, right?
There's
and you're always like
next, yeah.
always something next. And I think taking that time to celebrate even tiny wins, and we think about this a lot. We run withdrawal management and detox services, and in those situations where people are just starting their healing journey from addiction and substance abuse, right? Like very little things can be very hopeful, right? So that ability to just be able to focus on a small change in your body or things like that are the start of your healing, and then embracing those things, and then celebrating that stuff, being like I felt a change, my mind's different, I'm thinking different, I'm feel like those things we need to celebrate, and not everything has to be macro changes all the time. It's those little things, and especially in really intense work and crisis work, like if you can't celebrate small things, and I think having fun while you're doing it as well, and some people think it's a little crass, but if you're not having fun all the time, like even doing hard things, laughing and enjoying hard times, it's part of life, and you're going to get through them, but you need to make them fun, and you need to celebrate more little things, and I think that's where you get the most hope, right? Like I could rattle off a million success stories, and they'll mean a lot to me or those people, but it's what do you have in your life and your family and the people you're working with and caring with that are you can celebrate and enjoy, and I think that's where the hope comes from, and I think hope that we all want something better, and we're all working as much as we can together, and so I think the more we bring folks together, that happens in a really good way.
Beautifully said. I think too, all the systems and everything is just stories we tell ourselves. It's the stories we've all collectively agreed to understand and believe in, and I think the pandemic and just the last 4 or 5 years in general have really shaken those foundations that we thought were just givens. And I think it's interesting to see people start, wake up is a term that's thrown around a lot, but it's reassuring and hopeful to see the wokeness start to permeate a little bit. And I know that's a bad word for some groups, but it just means being awoken to how the world actually is, rather than otherwise. So final thoughts, and what would you like to leave our listeners with? Any sort of parting thoughts, summations of what you've talked about, and then maybe also include where people can find out more about your organization as well, whether it's a website or anything like that. So Dan first.
Yeah, I know. I just really appreciate being together with Grace and Jamil. Good to see you again. And look, stay curious, stay open, try not to judge, bark the stories, get out there, meet people, talk to people.
Look people in the eye.
Yeah.
And where can people find out more about your
organization? Go to our website, just type in the Réseau Compassion Network, Compassion Network, it should pop up, and you'll learn a lot about what we're doing and all our network organizations that I think continue to do some good work in our community.
Beautiful. Grace, same thing to you. Final thoughts, and where can people find out more?
Well, I'm going to say come join our circles.
Yes.
They're free to participants, right? So our website is www.circlesforreconciliation.ca. So check us out. Come talk to us, and let's talk to each other.
Have those conversations. Look
Yes.
people in the eyes and share and empathize and connect. Yeah, beautifully said. Jamil, last word to you.
Yeah, I think engaging in your community is the best, and I think civil disobedience is good, right? Like every change comes from people standing up and fighting power, and I think the more you speak truth to power, and the more you fight that change, the better it is. And it doesn't, I mean, the fight is a aggressive word, but it doesn't, we talked about earlier about how you have conversations and how you build those things, but it takes people to be bold. It takes people to question the status quo and push limits. And I think I've always been fortunate to kind of work at places where I was able to do that in my roles, and I always feel super lucky to do that. But I also take that responsibility to make sure other people have that ability to do that as well. And I think that's an important part about every inch you can get advancing, you need to also bring people up and support them advancing those inches as well. So I think the more we have to do that, and we have to disrupt, because if we don't, we won't see change. And I think we have to work for that change, and that's what we try to do at Main Street Project, right? Really try to change. Where we're in a place where we do a lot of crisis and emergency work now, but our goals are to be a housing organization in the future that is not doing as much emergency crisis work, because there's less emergency crisis work to do in the future, right? So that's where we got to work to get towards. So you can check out Main Street Project on all the social media. We just started doing more videos for TikTok and Reels, so our communications people are very excited about that. And mainstreetproject.ca, everything's on there. And I mean, I always tell people too, there's nothing we do that we don't share or isn't available. So if you see something you like in our programs or our work, in anything, and you want, like, I'll send you the policy, I'll send you the draft documents, I'll send you everything, right? Because I think the more we no one owns this work, right? It's what work for betterment of the community. So the more we do that together, so I know we're working hard to get more documents up on our website so people can just use them and take them and make what they can with them, right? And so the more we do that collectively, I think the better it is, and it'll save everybody a ton of time.
Planting those seeds of change. Jamil Mahmood, thank you, from the Main Street Project. Grace Shedler from Circles for Reconciliation, and Daniel Lucier from Rousseau Compassion Network.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the conversation today. It's an honor to have you as guests, and thank you for just planting these seeds of ideas in people's minds to try to, join community, support your local, wherever you happen to be right now, and just get out there, look people in the eye, and try to make the world a better place. That's what we got to do. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Excellent.